awakening this morning when federal agents stormed the Clovis home of a Hells Angels motorcycle club member.
The FBI arrested members of the Bandidos in San Antonio yesterday.
Pagans are among the big four motorcycle gangs.
A member of the Mongols biker gang has been arrested in connection with the murder of a rival gang member.
Well, Tony Lupica, who is the president of the Anderson chapter of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, told me the community should not be afraid of them. Lupica says, quote, "We'll embrace you, you embrace us."
5 clubs and 5 patches that men have killed for the right to wear. The president of the Outlaws says the community has nothing to fear. And if that were true, then none of this should exist. But it does, and that is why these are the most dangerous bikers in history.
Maurice Mom Boucher, Hells Angels, Canada. Every man counted down before this one was dangerous to other criminals, to rival clubs, to his own brothers. Maurice Boucher was dangerous to the state. He is the one figure on this entire list who looked at a functioning democracy and decided he could break its justice system by force. And for a time, it looked like he might be right. Boucher came off the hard streets of working-class Quebec, dropped out in the 9th grade, did time for armed robbery, and joined the Hells Angels Montreal chapter in 1987, where he was smart and driven and ruthless enough to climb fast. He built and led the Nomads, an elite chapter of the most powerful angels in Quebec. And then in 1994, he did the thing that defined him. He demanded that every dealer and every crew in the province buy their drugs from the Hells Angels, submit, or be destroyed. And when the rival rock machine refused, the Quebec Biker War began. For 8 years, the province was a battlefield of bombings and burning cars and gunfire, and more than 160 people were killed, some of them with no connection to either side at all. But the war is not what puts Boucher at the top. This is. In March 1997, a hitman for the rival club became a police informant. And it was not the first time, because since 1985, several killers tied to the biker world had cut deals with prosecutors for lighter sentences. Boucher concluded that if the informants kept flipping, the Hells Angels would lose everything, so he devised a plan of a kind no biker in North America had ever attempted. He would attack the justice system directly, so violently and so publicly that the system would never dare offer another deal. He started at the bottom with the prison guards. On June 26, 1997, 2 of his men shot and killed a prison guard named Diane Lavigne as she drove home from work, and in September they ambushed 2 more guards outside a prison, killing Pierre Rondeau. These were not rivals or informants. They were civil servants, murdered to send a message to the courts themselves. The state very nearly lost. At his 1998 trial, the jury was frightened, and Boucher walked free, and the whole country was stunned that a man could order the killing of prison guards and be acquitted. But the justice system did not surrender, which is the one thing his plan depended on. In 2002, they tried again, and this time he was convicted of ordering the murders and sentenced to life. Even then, he did not stop, because in 2015, police uncovered evidence that Boucher had ordered a mafia hit from inside his prison cell. He died there in 2022 of cancer at 69. That is why he stands at the top of this list. Sonny Barger built the army, and Jim Tinndahn started a 4-country war, and Jønke Nielsen felt nothing at all when he killed. But only Maurice Boucher looked at the machinery of the state, the guards and the courts, and the law itself, and decided he could terrorize it into submission. He was wrong in the end. But he came closer than anyone in the outlaw world ever has, and the fact that a single biker could make a democracy fight for the survival of its own justice system is what makes Mom Boucher the most dangerous biker in history. Jønke Nielsen, Hells Angels, Denmark. Understand why Jønke Nielsen sits this high. Start with a submachine gun, an orange Volkswagen, and a bicycle hidden in the back of a van. On the 25th of May, 1984, Henning Norbert Knudsen, the man everyone knew as Mackerel, the national president of the Bullshit Motorcycle Club, sat in that Volkswagen outside his home on Amager with his wife Pia beside him. Months earlier, Mackerel had gone on live Danish television and declared he would never let the Hells Angels take control of Denmark. Nielsen had watched it, and Nielsen, by his own later account, had made the decision to kill him calmly, 2 days in advance, sat with it, and accepted it. He was waiting in a van across the street, masked, with a submachine gun loaded with 28 rounds and a bicycle stowed in the back for the escape. He came out fast, ran to the car, and emptied a burst through the windscreen. Pia screamed and threw herself out of the car, so Nielsen walked to the door and fired again into Mackerel's back. 16 rounds into his and back, and left him hanging half out of the car with his legs tangled in the gear stick and his head on the road. Nielsen described the moment years later without a flicker. He could not see whether the man was dead, so he emptied the magazine into him until it stopped firing to be sure, and to be sure no one could pick up the gun and shoot him in the back as he rode away. Then he cycled off. Within hours he was leaving Denmark on a fake passport. Everything about the man is in that scene, the planning and the coldness and the refusal of any limit, and the rest of his life only extends it. He had co-founded the first Scandinavian Hells Angels chapter at 20, one of the youngest people ever to found an Angels chapter anywhere, and he had understood from the start that the patch alone was not enough. So he wore offensive symbols in public not from belief but from calculation, to make the club impossible for Denmark to ignore. He was among the 4 Angels in the 1983 restaurant killing, and after Mackerel he fled to Canada under a false identity and joined the East End Vancouver Hells Angels, working as a bouncer, getting into street fights alongside police officers who had no idea the man beside them was wanted for murder. While a fugitive, he published a memoir, and it became a bestseller in Denmark. They caught him, extradited him, and sentenced him to 16 years, and like Bent Nielsen, he simply kept working from his cell, helping orchestrate the Swedish expansion through the same lethal contest between Malmö gangs. And in July 1996, during the war, men infiltrated Jyderup State Prison and fired more than 20 rounds from an automatic weapon through the window of his cell, hitting him 3 times. He survived that too, which tells you he was considered the operational heart of the Danish Angels even while locked away. He was expelled in bad standing by the club he had built in 2020, ran for the Copenhagen City Council and lost, and went into self-imposed exile in New Zealand, expressing no regret for Mackerel, for the restaurant, for any of it. Asked in a documentary what happened inside him when he killed a man, Nielsen answered in 3 words: "Nothing happened inside me." No one in European biker history matched the scale of his violence, the length of his career, the mark he left on multiple countries, and the sheer cold improbability of the whole trajectory. And when he looked back on all of it, he felt nothing at all. Frederick Boucher. Rock Machine. Canada clubhouses were supposed to be untouchable. They were fortresses, the physical proof that a chapter was permanent, and in the entire Quebec biker war, no one had ever destroyed one. Then in February 1997, Frederick Boucher blew the Hells Angels Quebec City clubhouse to rubble in a single night, and overnight he went from a regional figure to the most talked about biker on the Rock Machine side of the war. That was Boucher's whole method in one act. He was leading the losing side of a war against the most powerful outlaw club on earth. And his answer was not to hunker down. It was to hit harder and louder than anyone believed a smaller club would dare. Boucher came out of the Rock Machine's Quebec City chapter, a younger, aggressive operator in a club that was being hunted to extinction. The Hells Angels had more men, more money, an international brand, and a leader in Maurice Boucher, who had demanded the entire province buy its drugs from the Angels or be destroyed. The Rock Machine had a few dozen members and a founder locked in an American prison, and by every measure that mattered, they should have lost quickly. Boucher refused to accept that arithmetic. Across 1996 and 1997, he ordered a campaign of bombings that proved the mighty Hells Angels could be reached and humiliated and hurt. And when the club's national president was arrested in September 1997, Boucher stepped into the top job. Then he did the thing that nearly changed the war. Boucher understood that a small local club could not beat a global empire alone, so he went looking for an empire of his own. Across the ocean, the Bandidos were fighting the Hells Angels to a standstill in the Nordic War, and Boucher saw a lifeline. In June 1997, he flew to Stockholm with 2 other rock machine leaders to ask the Swedish Bandidos for their backing. And those Swedish police detained the delegation and threw them out of the country. The idea did not die. Fowker kept building the relationship because he had decided the rock machine's survival depended on becoming part of the Bandidos, on trading a war it was losing alone for a place inside the one organization big enough to stand against the Angels. He almost pulled it off, but the blow that stopped him did not come from the Hells Angels. It came from within, because a rock machine informant gave police everything, and on December 5, 2000, they swept into Quebec City and arrested Boucher in the middle of finalizing the Bandidos' absorption. In May 2001, he pleaded guilty to 28 charges, including the 7 bombings he had ordered, and was sentenced to 12 years. The man who had reduced a fortress to rubble and nearly saved a doomed club through sheer nerve was brought down not by his enemy, but by one of his own. He ranks this high for a reason few on this list can claim. Fowker took the most dangerous man in North American biker history head-on, refused to lose the way he was supposed to, and came within an arrest of turning a local war into an international one. Big Jim, Tinndahn. Bandidos, Denmark. On the 25th of September 1997, 2 men shook hands inside a Danish television studio, live, in front of the country. One was Jønke Nielsen of the Hells Angels. The other was Jim Tinndahn of the Bandidos. They were there to end a war, and behind that handshake lay 9 dead, 74 attempted murders, anti-tank rockets fired into buildings on residential streets, car bombs in city centers, and a parliament forced to rewrite its own laws in 9 days because the violence had outrun everything the country's law was built to contain. And the man on the Bandidos side of that handshake was the man who had started all of it, on purpose. Tinndahn grew up working class in North Zealand, struggled through school with dyslexia, trained as a mechanic, and found the biker world early. He rose through a series of clubs until, by the early 1990s, he was leading the Undertakers, and in 1992, he reached out to the Bandidos in the United States and France, looking for a bigger name and bigger reach. In December 1993, the Undertakers patched over, and the Bandidos had their first chapter in Scandinavia. The Hells Angels allowed it on one condition, that the Bandidos stay in their 2 existing chapters and not expand. Tinndahn had no intention of honoring that. In January 1994, he reached across the water into Helsingborg, Sweden, and brought in another club as a Bandidos chapter, and that single deliberate move enraged the Malmö Hells Angels, who declared war. Within months, a local conflict had ignited across all of Scandinavia, and the Nordic Biker War had begun, because Tinndahn had decided to break the one rule that kept the peace. As it escalated, he backed retaliation at every turn, and the weapons that came into the war were the weapons that made it infamous. Machine guns and grenades and landmines and anti-tank rockets raided from military depots. By 1995, he was European president, and his own men gave him a nickname, Solkongen, the Sun King, after the absolute monarch Louis XIV, because they understood exactly what kind of ruler he was. At his peak, he commanded 1,600 members across Europe and Asia. And here is the thing that makes him more dangerous than the men who fired the rockets, not less. No single act of violence was ever pinned on Tinndahn personally. His convictions were for stolen goods and firearms, and later a drunk driving crash that left a passenger brain damaged, nothing close to the war he set in motion. When it finally ended, it ended on terms he negotiated, quietly dividing Scandinavian territory between the 2 clubs down to individual bars and nightclubs, none of it disclosed to the public. He did not need to fire a shot. The most dangerous man in a war is not always the one pulling the trigger. Sometimes he is the one who simply decided, coldly and deliberately, that the war would happen at all. Bent Blondie, Nielsen. Hells Angels of Denmark. On the 24th of September, 1983, A barman phoned Bent Nielsen to tell him 4 members of a rival club were drinking at a restaurant in Copenhagen. Nielsen gathered 3 angels, walked into that restaurant the same night, and killed 2 men, Steen Grabo Grander and Flemming Hall Jensen, with knives at their table, leaving a 3rd badly wounded. In September 1984, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 16 years. That should have ended his reign. Instead, it barely interrupted it, because Bent Svane Nielsen proved something a maximum security prison was never designed to withstand. A man can command a criminal organization across an entire continent from a cell if he simply refuses to accept that the cell means anything. Known throughout the Danish biker world as Blondie, Nielsen had co-founded the first Hells Angels chapter in all of Scandinavia. In 1978, he merged 5 Danish clubs into one organization under his own leadership, and in 1980, with the blessing of Willem van Boxtel in Amsterdam, that organization became Scandinavia's first official Hells Angels chapter. He had built the foundation. The restaurant murders were how he cleared the ground, because the club he killed for controlled Christiania in Copenhagen, the largest open drug market in Europe, and once they were broken, the Angels took everything. Then he went to prison and kept working. From his cell, he ran the Danish chapter, settled its disputes, and directed its operations. And in the late 1980s, he engineered the club's expansion into Sweden with a piece of cold strategy that reads like something out of a war room rather than a prison bunk. He told 3 rival gangs in Malmö that whichever one wiped out the other 2 first would receive Hells Angels status. The gangs tore each other apart, the survivor took the prize, and Sweden had its first Hells Angels chapter, built entirely through a lethal contest that Nielsen refereed from behind bars. The man who won that contest, Thomas Müller, sits earlier on this very list. Paroled in 1994, Nielsen walked out into the Nordic War he had helped make inevitable and took his place as the dominant figure on the Angels' side, holding that position through 3 years of rockets and assassinations across 4 countries. And when it was over, it was Nielsen who ended it. Standing in a Danish television studio on the 25th of September, 1997, shaking hands with the Bandidos president in front of the entire country, and saying the thing that mattered, that it was finished. He had co-founded a chapter, murdered 2 men in a restaurant, run his organization from a cell, designed an entire national expansion through a war he refereed from prison, and then led his club through the deadliest biker conflict Europe had ever seen. The walls held his body for 16 years. They never once held his authority. Number 6. Sonny Barger. Hells Angels. USA. When Sonny Barger founded the Oakland chapter in 1957, motorcycle clubs were loose collections of rowdy bikers who rode together and brawled in bars. He was 19 years old, and he saw something none of them did. Within a year, he had moved the national headquarters to Oakland and made himself the de facto national leader, and he began doing the thing that separated the Hells Angels from every other club on the road. He gave them rules, territorial boundaries, and a chapter structure. As one account of him put it, he realized they could be rowdy bikers, but they needed discipline. They needed an army. The violence that built his reputation came early, and it was brutal. In 1965, after a bar patron insulted the club, Barger forced a pistol into the man's mouth and pulled the trigger, and by his own account in his autobiography, since the man was already shot, he bent him over a pool table and shot him again. He was tied to more killings across the years. A sleeping drug dealer executed in 1972, prospects found bound and beaten in a car trunk, and he beat some of the charges and served time for others. But the violence was only ever half of what he was doing, because while it built fear, the organization built power. By 1969, Barger had opened chapters in New York, Salem, and Rochester, and London had become the first European chapter, with Zurich following in 1970. Within a decade, he had turned a California motorcycle club into an international network. That same year, 1969, the Hells Angels were hired to provide security for the Rolling Stones at Altamont, and in front of a crowd of hundreds of thousands, an angel and a young concert-goer named Meredith Hunter. an event that fixed the club's image in the public mind for a generation. Barger was there, and the club walked away from it, the way it walked away from so much. The law eventually reached him. He was convicted of heroin trafficking in 1974 and later of a conspiracy to bomb a rival Outlaws MC clubhouse. 13 years behind bars in total, but the organization kept expanding the entire time because by then it no longer depended on him being free. When Barger died in 2022 at the age of 83, the Hells Angels operated hundreds of chapters across 6 continents. Nearly every European name on this list, Van Boxtel, Muller, Hannebuth, Arabachi, built their empires inside the structure Barger created and reported, in the end, up a chain that led back to Oakland. He did not just lead the Hells Angels, he became them. Donald Chambers, Bandidos, USA. Every murder on the Bandidos side of this list, every drug deal and bombing and war across 20 countries, traces back to one man walking into a bar in San Leon, Texas, on March 4, 1966. Donald Chambers was a 36-year-old dock worker and Marine Corps veteran who had ridden with other motorcycle clubs and found them all too tame, so he built one that answered to no authority at all. He named it the Bandidos, after Mexican bandits who lived outside the law, chose red and gold for the Marine Corps he had served in, and gave it a motto that told the world exactly what it was. We are the people our parents warned us about. From that bar, Chambers built something that would last nearly 60 years, and the principles he set at the start became the DNA of every chapter that followed. Absolute loyalty to the club above everything. Total secrecy about club business. No cooperation with law enforcement under any circumstances, ever. Violence as the first and preferred way to settle a conflict. He created the military-style hierarchy the club still uses. National president down to sergeant-at-arms down to chapter president, a structure built for rapid expansion under central control. As founder and first president, he took the name Mother, and every president who came after him would echo it. The violence was there from the beginning, and it was cold. On December 22, 1972, 2 drug dealers sold a Bandido baking soda claiming it was methamphetamine. So Chambers drove them into the desert north of El Paso, ordered a prospect to dig a grave, and shot both men with a shotgun before their bodies were burned and buried. A prospect who was there confessed to the FBI 2 days later, and Chambers was convicted of double murder and sentenced to life. He was paroled in 1983 after 11 years, retired from the club, and died of cancer in 1999. But his time in prison never diminished him, because the thing he had built did not need him present to run. That is what makes Chambers dangerous in a way that outranks men with far higher body counts. He was not the most violent Bandido, and he did not lead the longest. He is here because without him, none of the rest exists. Bob Dumas proved the club could hide behind legitimate business. Jeff Pike turned it into a military operation. George Wagers took it international. But every one of them was building on the foundation Chambers laid in 6 short years, a system engineered to keep generating violence long after the man who designed it was gone. 27 years after his death, it is still standing. Yves Apache, Trudeau, Hells Angels, Canada. They called him Apache, and they called him the Mad Bomber. But the number that defined Yves Trudeau was 43. That was how many killings he eventually pleaded to, and it made him the most prolific hitman in the history of Quebec's underworld. When someone needed to be taken out, Trudeau got the call, and for 2 decades he answered it with bombs, bullets, and ambushes that were quick, violent, and final. He was born in 1946 and grew up in Montreal, and in 1968 he joined the Popeyes Motorcycle Club, the crew that would later become the first Canadian Hells Angels chapter. At first, he was just another tough guy in the gang, but he turned out to have an exceptional talent for killing. So he rose fast by doing the club's dirtiest work, taking out rivals one by one through the biker wars of the 1970s. When the Hells Angels absorbed the Popeyes at the end of that decade, they kept Trudeau and gave him more power, because a man that willing and that capable was worth more than almost anyone else they had. His darkest moment came in 1985 at the Lennoxville Massacre, when the club decided to purge 5 members of its own Laval chapter and kill them one by one, and he did not hesitate. But later that same year, the club turned on him, seizing his money and his bike while he was vulnerable. So the deadliest hitman the Hells Angels had turned on them just as coldly. He flipped. Trudeau became a police informant and told them everything: the murders, the structure, the secrets. And in 1986, he pleaded guilty to 43 counts of manslaughter in exchange for a sentence that made him eligible for parole after just 7 years. The public was furious and the victims' families were heartbroken, but the deal stood. He was released in 1994 under a new name and tried to disappear as a small-town bus driver, but the past does not forget. In 2004, he was arrested again for assaulting a boy of 13, and the judge who sentenced him delivered the line that followed Trudeau to his grave: "You have killed more people than Canada did in the Gulf War." By then, he was hated by the club he had served and the society he had terrorized, and he died in 2008 of cancer, alone and under guard. Trudeau was the deadliest killer the Canadian Angels ever produced, and then he became the informant who gave them up. The two things that world fears most in one man. Niels Poulsen, Bandidos, Denmark. There were about 150 people inside the Hells Angels clubhouse in Copenhagen on the night of October 6, 1996, because the Angels were holding a party. Posters had gone up around the neighborhood inviting ordinary people in, and a 29-year-old woman named Jana Krohn had seen one and come along. She had no connection to any motorcycle club. She was a local woman at a party. Across the street, a Bandidos prospect climbed into position with a weapon that had no business anywhere near a residential street, and steadied it on his shoulder. Niels Poulsen had not even earned his full patch yet. He was a prospect, the entry-level rank, a man still proving himself to the club. What he did to prove himself was fire a shoulder-launched anti-tank rocket, stolen from a Swedish army depot, into a building full of people. The weapon was built to punch through the armor of a tank, so it punched through the concrete wall of the clubhouse and exploded inside. 2 people died. One was a Hells Angels prospect named Louis Linda Nielsen. The other was Jana Krohn, the woman who had come from a poster on a lamppost, the first civilian killed in the entire Nordic biker war. Others were wounded in the blast, and her death changed everything. Because until that night, the Danish public had been able to watch the war as something that happened to people who had chosen to be in it. A civilian killed by a military rocket at a party collapsed that comfortable distance completely. Poulsen was convicted and sentenced to life. His was not even the only rocket fired during the war, because anti-tank weapons had been loosed at clubhouses across Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. But it was his rocket and Jana Krohn's death that broke the political dam. Within 9 days, the Danish parliament passed the Rockerloven, the Rocker Act, giving police the power to evict clubs from their clubhouses, and politicians who had treated the war as a police matter began treating it as a national emergency. A prospect who had not yet earned his patch fired one stolen rocket, and in doing so rewrote Danish law and marked the moment the war stopped being the bikers' private business and became everyone's. Ferdinand Freddy Ogello. Pagans. USA. On the morning of May the 10th, 2012, a hired man walked through an unlocked door in Linwood, New Jersey, and shot April Kaufman twice inside her own home, and she was dead before she understood why anyone would want her killed. He was paid $20,000 for it, and he would overdose on heroin within a year. So for a long time, the trail went cold. But the man who had arranged her death was no contract professional. He was a pagan chapter leader and a small-time musician named Ferdinand Augello. And what he built was the strangest crime on this entire list. A killing with no turf behind it and no rival club. Only a divorce, a pill scheme, and a doctor who wanted his wife gone. Augello had joined the Pagans in the early 1990s and come up through the Cape May County chapter, one of the most active pagan regions on the East Coast. until he was a chapter leader who moved between the outlaw world and legitimate business with unsettling ease. To outsiders, he was a biker fixture and a local musician. To law enforcement, he was the connective tissue in a prescription pill ring, because Augello worked alongside a New Jersey endocrinologist named James Kaufman, who wrote painkiller prescriptions for pagan members and associates in exchange for cash. Augello sent the patients, Kaufman wrote the scripts, and the opioids ran through pagan channels while both men profited. The scheme held until April Kaufman, the doctor's wife, threatened to expose it during a bitter divorce. In the summer of 2011, Kaufman told Augello he would rather see his wife dead than lose half his empire to her. So Augello spent the better part of a year working his pagan contacts to find someone willing to take the job. He found his man, the killing was done, and then it sat cold for years, protected by the silence the club lived on and by the convenient overdose of the trigger man. What broke it was the thing that breaks so much of this world. A former Cape May chapter president turned informant to win leniency on unrelated charges, and his testimony pulled the curtain back on the whole murder-for-hire scheme, tying Augello directly to the hit and to the pill ring that had fed pagan profits for years. In 2018, a New Jersey jury found him guilty of murder, conspiracy, first-degree drug racketeering, and running a narcotics network, and he was sentenced to life. James Kaufman took his own life in a jail cell before he could stand trial. Inside pagan circles, Augello became a cautionary tale, the man who forgot the code, who stopped protecting the club and started protecting himself and brought all of it down, doing it. Thomas Möller, Hells Angels, Sweden. On the morning of January 26, 1994, in the Swedish city of Helsingborg, a man climbed onto the roof of a van parked outside a rival clubhouse, raised a high-caliber submachine gun, and opened fire on the building below. One man inside lost a finger, and the rest dove for cover. But this was not a street criminal settling a score, because the man on that roof was the president of the Malmö Hells Angels, the founding father of Sweden's entire Hells Angels operation, and at that moment the single most powerful outlaw biker in Europe. His name was Thomas Möller, and he had not sent someone that morning. He went himself. What he fired was the opening shot of the Great Nordic Biker War. 3 years, 4 countries, 11 dead, 74 attempted murders, anti-tank rockets stolen from military depots and fired at clubhouses in European capitals, and 2 governments rewriting their own laws because nothing they had was built for what was now happening on their streets. Möller had a clean record and a direct line to Sonny Barger in Oakland, which made him the one European leader who could sit across from the top of the organization. So he led the Swedish operation through every year of the war and helped negotiate the peace that finally ended it in 1997. Here is what makes him more than a war starter. While the war burned, while police were being blinded by bombs planted in their cars, Thomas Möller was collecting disability benefits from the Swedish state for a bad back. His declared income was about $1,700 a month. What he actually owned was a Ferrari, a Hummer, multiple apartments in Malmö, and a seaside estate on the cliffs above Cape Town, with a private room inside it that held a collection of genuine Nazi memorabilia. A Swedish officer asked how he had hurt his back and answered his own question. He has a good doctor. That gap was the whole design. Under Möller, the Swedish Hells Angels accumulated 2,800 criminal convictions, 420 of them for violence, an organization built for the most sophisticated, highest revenue, lowest exposure crime available. And across all of it, the man who founded it and led it and started a war from the roof of a van was personally convicted of exactly 2 things: assault and threatening a police officer. He built a machine that generated crime at scale and insulated him from nearly all of it. And the Swedish justice system spent the better part of 2 decades unable to close the distance between what he had built and what it could prove he did. Michael Lerche Olsen, Bandidos, Denmark. On the 4th of June, 1997, A van packed with 30 to 50 kilograms of explosives detonated outside the Bandidos' headquarters in Drammen, Norway, and the blast leveled the building to rubble. It was built for one man. Michael Lurch Olsen walked out of the burning wreckage alive. And this was not the first time the Hells Angels had tried to erase him, because Lurch Olsen had made a single decision that put a permanent target on his back, and then survived the most determined campaign to kill one man in the entire Nordic biker war. He had been president of the Hells Angels Copenhagen chapter before he was expelled, and expelled men in that world are expected to disappear, to go quiet and fade out. Olsen did the opposite. He crossed the one line the Angels treated as unforgivable because he joined the Bandidos, and not as a foot soldier. He became European Sergeant at Arms, the enemy's chief enforcer across the entire continent. So the Hells Angels decided he had to die. What followed ran for nearly 2 years and escalated every time. On the 15th of July, 1996, Olsen was riding through Mjøndalen in Norway with a bodyguard beside him, a man named Jan Krogh Jensen, who rode there for exactly one purpose: to keep him alive. They were ambushed on the road, and Jensen was shot in the head and killed, and police concluded he had died in the place his employer was meant to occupy. Olsen survived. The intended target lived, and the man protecting him did not. Less than a year later came the van in Drammen, and this time the bystander who died was a 51-year-old woman named Irene Kievold, driving past at the wrong second, killed along with 22 others injured in the blast. Twice now the Angels had come for Olsen with military-grade force, and twice the people who died were people who had nothing to do with any of it. After the war, Olsen became one of the most symbolically loaded figures in European biker history, and not for anything he did. He mattered for what his survival proved. An entire organization had thrown everything it had, ambush and bomb, at killing one man, and had failed completely, leaving only innocent dead behind it. Most men on this list are dangerous for the violence they caused. Olsen is here for the violence he absorbed and outlived. Number: Jeffrey Fay Pike. Bandidos, USA. On the evening of March 18, 2006, Anthony Benish walked out of a pizza restaurant in North Austin with his girlfriend and her 2 children, and a single rifle shot dropped him face down in the parking lot. Benish was not a random target. He had been trying to start a Hells Angels chapter in Austin, and Texas was Bandidos' territory, so the club had warned him repeatedly to stop. He believed he had the Angels behind him, so he ignored every warning, and that decision got him killed. The order had come from the top of the Bandidos, from a man who was nowhere near the parking lot that night. His name was Jeffrey Fay Pike. Pike had joined the Bandidos in 1979, working ordinary jobs before the club became his life, and he was ambitious and strategic enough to climb steadily until, by the mid-2000s, he reached the top and became national president. Under him, the club grew stronger, expanded its territory, and deepened its criminal enterprises, running meth and cocaine through Texas and working with the Mexican mafia, while Pike presented himself in public as a businessman who restored classic cars. He did not need to carry out violence himself because he directed it, and the Benish assassination was the clearest proof of that. He had ordered a man killed for the crime of flying a rival flag on ground the Bandidos claimed. The event that made his presidency infamous was one he was not physically present for either. On May 17, 2015, under Pike's leadership, a Bandidos gathering at a Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco collided with their rivals the Cossacks, and the parking lot erupted. By the time it ended, 9 bikers were dead, more than a dozen were wounded, and 177 people were arrested, the deadliest biker shootout in American history. Pike was not there, but prosecutors argued the bloodbath reflected the violent culture he had built at the top of the organization. That image finally collapsed in January 2016, when federal agents raided his home during Operation Texas Rocker and charged him under RICO with murder conspiracy, drug trafficking, and assault. In 2018, a federal jury convicted him on all counts. and he received a life sentence plus 10 years. The man who once tried to keep all of Texas under one patch will die in a federal prison, brought down not for anything his own hands did, but for every order that flowed down from them. Willem Big Willem Van Boxtel, Hells Angels, Netherlands. At its height, one man's network controlled the cocaine coming in from Colombia, the cannabis coming in from Morocco, and the heroin coming in from Turkey and Afghanistan, all of it funneling through 2 ports and out into the rest of Europe. He was not a cartel boss or a government official. He was the president of the Hells Angels Amsterdam chapter, and according to an informant who knew the organization from the inside, he ran all Hells Angels operations across the entire continent. His name was Willem van Boxtel, and the strangest part of his story is who paid for the clubhouse he ran it all from. His career did not begin with drugs. It began with a beating. In September 1974, an 18-year-old Van Boxtel and his gang stormed a school in Amsterdam, attacked teachers and students, threw a man down a stairwell, and put a snack bar owner in the hospital. And he was convicted of assault along with 11 of his followers. Then the city of Amsterdam, desperate to stop the violence, did something remarkable. It gave him money, the equivalent of over $100,000, to build a clubhouse, plus an annual grant to run charity events and teach young people to ride motorcycles, all on the understanding that he would stop hurting people. He took the money and built the clubhouse. He did not stop hurting people. And when officials realized he had spent the charity grants on upgrading the clubhouse instead, they quietly ended the payments. But by then, it no longer mattered. Because by then, Van Boxtel had the patch. Sonny Barger had been watching him, granted him prospect status in 1977, and in October 1978, 2 Oakland Angels flew to Amsterdam and made him president of the first Hells Angels chapter in the Netherlands. He moved immediately, taking control of the ports of Amsterdam and Rotterdam and turning them into the primary drug transit hubs for all of Europe. Every Hells Angels chapter on the continent that wanted product had to come through him. Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish police all confirmed the same thing, that Van Boxtel's Amsterdam chapter held ultimate authority over every Angels chapter in Scandinavia. He was not just a president. He was the infrastructure the whole European club ran on. Beyond the ports, he took brothels, restaurants, cafes, and nightclubs across the Netherlands, opened new Dutch chapters, and built ties to Angels in Germany, Britain, Austria, and Australia, men flying to Amsterdam specifically to meet him. Investigators who spent years mapping the European Angels concluded he had created one of the most powerful underworld organizations on the continent. A man who started his criminal life beating up a schoolboy had built the backbone of Hells Angels drug trafficking across all of Europe, and the city of Amsterdam had paid for the building he did it from. Ian Ram Hansen, Bandidos. Denmark. The club gave him a title, Kriegsminister, Minister of War. He had earned the Expect No Mercy patch at 19, and by the time he stood trial, he had been a Bandidos member for 15 years, and a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation described him with clinical flatness, normal intelligence, and a complete absence of empathy for other human beings. On a November night in 2015, that absence walked up the side of an apartment building in Copenhagen. At 20 to 4 in the morning on the 11th of November, Ian Ram Hansen climbed a scaffold fixed to the outside of a building in Frederiksberg, and with an accomplice, he crawled through a window into the apartment. Inside, 3 young men were asleep. Philip Rasmussen was 19, Suhaib Jafar was 23, Mike Patrick Winther was 24. None of them woke, so none of them had any warning, and none of them had any chance. 6 shots from a revolver and a shotgun, into their heads and their arms, fired into men who never opened their eyes. The prosecutor who handled the case called it pure of a kind rarely seen in Denmark. The reason for it was honor. Weeks earlier, a Bandidos minister of war had been stabbed, and the club's reputation was being tested inside the prisons. So the answer to that, in the logic that governed Hansen, was to prove that disrespect would be repaid in blood regardless of who happened to be in the room. That the three sleeping men were even the correct targets for that message barely seems to have mattered. What mattered was the message. Hansen had been released from a police station just 3.5 hours before the killings. His shoe print was found inside the apartment, and DNA and witness testimony did the rest. So he was convicted in May 2017 and sentenced to life, upheld on appeal, and later approved for extradition to France over a separate serious assault. His co-defendant, another minister of war, never reached trial, taking his own life in his cell. 3 young men had been asleep, the club's honor had been in question, and in the mind of Ian Ram Hansen, those were the only 2 facts in the room. Jack Rosga, Outlaws MC, USA. It was supposed to be a charity ride. On April 17, 2010, an event called the Flood Run drew bikers out onto the roads, but the Outlaws MC contingent riding under their national president, Jack Rosga, crossed from Wisconsin into Minnesota with something else in mind. They ambushed a group of Hells Angels, beat them to the pavement, stripped the jackets off their backs, and rode away carrying the colors like trophies. That was how Rosga ran the club. And the charity ride was just the setting he happened to use that day. Under his leadership, violence became the thing the Outlaws MC were built around. The pattern ran through event after event. The Cycle Expo in Virginia in 2006, the Dinwiddie Racetrack in 2008, the Cockade City Bar in Petersburg in 2009, where the Outlaws MC teamed up with the Pagans, Daytona, Bike Week, the Charlotte Easy Riders Expo in 2010, each one detonating into gang warfare. And when the Outlaws MC planted a clubhouse in Rock Hill, South Carolina, the Hells Angels treated it as a line crossed. So by the end of 2009, an angel in Maine had been shot in a hit that nearly killed him. But the club was not only fighting, because under Rosga it was running drugs, moving weapons, and building a criminal network that reached across state lines, all of it flowing up to him. What the federal case revealed was that Rosga had not been running a loose collection of rowdy chapters. He had been running a structure. The indictment out of the Eastern District of Virginia laid it out like a military chain of command. The national president at the top, regional bosses in the middle, local presidents managing the ground. A criminal corporation whose product was drugs and fear and control. When they finally caught him, Rosga admitted to undercover agents that he had always known prison would be his end. He was convicted of racketeering and conspiracy and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The head of a chain the government had spent years drawing out one link at a time. Nekati Niko, Arabachi, Hells Angels, Germany/Turkey. There is an arrest warrant out for Nekati Arabachi. Not a local one, not a national one, but an EU-wide warrant issued by Spain in 2015 and binding on every member state of the European Union. And it means nothing. Arabachi has been photographed driving luxury sports cars in Monaco. He has posted his own location online under his own name while wanted across the continent. European law enforcement knows exactly who he is and exactly where he is, and for years they could not touch him. So the whole story turns on one simple question. Why not? Part of the answer is a passport. Arabachi was born in Cologne in 1972 to Turkish parents, which makes him a Turkish citizen, and Turkey does not extradite its own. But that legal fact is only why he is free. It is not why he belongs on this list. He is here because of what he built before anyone was in a position to stop him. He came up through the door security world, the bouncers who controlled the entrances to Germany's nightclubs. And from there he took control of the brothel networks across Cologne, Leverkusen, Frankfurt, and the whole Ruhr region, run through front companies that hid who really owned them. A fruit business sat on top as cover. Underneath it was an empire. In 2002, German authorities finally arrested him, and in 2004, a court convicted him of leading a criminal organization, human trafficking, forced prostitution, and robbery, and sentenced him to 9 years. Even that did not fully contain him, because from prison he was suspected of plotting to have the prosecutor who handled his case assassinated. a plot that collapsed only because of errors in the translation of the wiretap evidence. He served about a third of his sentence, and in 2007, he was deported to Turkey on the condition that he never returned to Germany. For most men, that would have been the end of the European story. For Arabaci, it was an intermission, because deportation did not slow him at all. He opened venues on the Turkish coast, and by 2010 he had become president of the Hells Angels Nomads chapter in Turkey, formally embedding himself at the top of the club in the one country where Europe could not reach him. When Frank Hannebuth was arrested in 2013, and the question arose of who would sit atop the European Angels, Arabaci's name came up first, so Spain issued its warrant, and he kept living his life. He was detained in Turkey in 2018 and released, detained again in 2020 over a murder case and released, photographed in 2023, gifting a gold chain to the child of a Turkish crime boss, and photographed the same year in Monaco with his cars. And still, the pursuit went on. In September 2025, a dozen armed police detained him mid-meal at a restaurant in Slovakia. And after 10 hours, he walked out to cheers from Hells Angels waiting outside, protected by a legal technicality, and driven off in a Mercedes. Weeks later, in October 2025, he landed in Izmir and was detained again, this time by Turkey's own organized crime unit, on charges of running a criminal organization and aggravated extortion. More than 2 decades after his first arrest, they were still trying to hold him, and he was still operating, still building, still there. That is the answer to the question. The godfather of Cologne has been convicted, deported, warranted across a continent, and detained in country after country, and through all of it, he has never once been stopped. He is the man the law cannot finish. Frank Hannebuth, Hells Angels, Germany. For years, if a person read the local papers in Hanover, Frank Hannebuth came across as a civic asset, refined, respected. Photographed at charity functions and community celebrations, the man who had brought order to the city's red light district and made it safer. Politicians came to his events, business owners welcomed him, and there was a whole public version of Frank Hannebuth that had been carefully built. The other version was the one European police had been documenting for more than a decade. Hannebuth was a trained carpenter who became a professional boxer and then a pimp, learning the geography of Hanover's criminal economy from the ground up before he ever had the power to own it. He joined the Bones Club in 1995, patched over to the Hells Angels in 1999, and turned the Hanover chapter into the richest and most powerful in Germany. The engine was simple. Brothels on Hamburg's Reeperbahn, the most famous red light district in Europe, were generating 150,000 euros a month at their peak. He did 3 years for assault in 2001, but he came out and expanded. And it was after prison that he built the thing that set him apart from every other Angels leader on the continent. He built genuine public respectability, an actual place inside the establishment. And he did not stop at Germany. He moved to Mallorca, made himself chapter president on the island, and it was there that the two versions of him finally collided. In July 2013, Spanish police arrested him with dozens of associates on charges of running a criminal organization, prostitution, drug trafficking, and money laundering. And the European press covering it described him plainly as the boss of all the Hells Angels in Europe. That was not loose language. It reflected what investigators believed after years of mapping his network. His trial opened in Madrid's High Court in January 2023 and ran for 9 months, and it ended the way so much of Hannebuth's life had ended, in his favor. The court acquitted him of every charge and acquitted 13 co-defendants alongside him. He walked out of the High Court a free man, exactly as he had always moved, in public and in plain sight, in a place where people knew his name and were quite sure they understood what kind of man he was. Christopher Bart, Baker, Pagans, USA. Even in a world where long prison sentences are worn like medals, 75 years is not punishment. It is erasure. That was the number a federal judge read out over Christopher Lamar Baker in Wilmington, North Carolina, in February 2023. And the courtroom went silent, because everyone understood that Baker was never walking out again. What makes that sentence land harder is that Baker was not some reckless street enforcer who shot his way to notoriety. He was the opposite. He came up through the Raleigh chapter in the early 2000s, quietly running drug money and product for senior members. And what set him apart was precision. He ran operations like a businessman, balancing crews and books with the same cold efficiency. So his reputation climbed until he reached the 13, the Pagans National Council, the small circle that decided who led and who fell. Inside it, he became known as the accountant, the man who kept the profits high and the problems buried, and his network reached across Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and West Virginia. Federal prosecutors put the scale of it at more than 268 kilograms of methamphetamine, laundered through biker rallies and tattoo parlors and roadside clubs. But the violence was not an accident of the business. It was built into it. Witnesses told investigators that Baker personally ordered the torture of a pagan accused of theft, demanding the man's fingers be cut off as punishment. And in another case, he sanctioned a murder after a rival dealer sold him counterfeit drugs. His authority was absolute, and it was enforced through money and fear in equal measure, which is why when the law finally moved on him, it was not a local bust, but a full-scale federal task force takedown. The 17 counts ranged across meth trafficking, money laundering, and firearms offenses, including possession of a machine gun, and the Fourth Circuit later upheld every one of them on appeal, closing the door for good. Inside the Pagans, Baker's fall hit harder than most, because he had not been a foot soldier. He had been one of the 13 men who decided who lived, who led, and who burned. And in the end, the machine he helped run turned the same math on him. Reuben Doc Cavazos. Mongols, USA. Reuben Cavazos earned the nickname Doc Honestly because before the Mongols he was a licensed radiology technician, a man with an education and a real skill in a world of career criminals. But when he took over as national president in the late 1990s, he had a vision that had nothing to do with X-rays. He wanted to turn the Mongols from a gang of aging, disrespected bikers into an organization that could hold its own even when outnumbered. And the way he did it changed the club permanently. His method was radical. He started recruiting straight out of Southern California's street gangs, pulling in men who had never owned or ridden a motorcycle in their lives, and the club exploded outward. He pushed chapters into 14 states and 6 countries, into Germany and Australia and Mexico, and he opened legitimate businesses to sit on top of it all. Motorcycle shops and tattoo parlors and security firms that laundered the money underneath. Behind those fronts, he wired the Mongols into the Mexican cartels, turning the club into a distributor for methamphetamine and cocaine across the United States, an operation that conservative estimates put at $20 million a year. But the same ego that built all of that is what brought it down. In 2008, Cavazos published a book about his own life, Honor Few, Fear None. And in it, he laid out the club's history, its wars, its violence, and its drug dealing in his own words. So the ATF simply used the book as evidence. Every story he told became an admission. On October 21st, 2008, Operation Black Rain came down, and more than 60 Mongols were arrested, Doc among them, on an 86-count federal indictment. And there was a second blow waiting inside the first, because it turned out ATF agents had infiltrated the club so completely that they had become full-patch members, questioned and even polygraphed by the Mongols without ever being caught. The end of Doc's story is the part the Mongols will not forgive. He pleaded guilty, admitted openly that he had led a murdering, drug-dealing conspiracy, and then served only about 14 months of a 14-year sentence, which, in that world, is not the behavior of a loyal 1%er. Many members believe he cooperated from the beginning. The club had already voted him out before his arrest, suspecting him of stealing and of dragging them into a war with the Mexican mafia, and afterward, they erased him. His name was struck from club history, because in the outlaw world there is no worse crime than being a rat, and Doc Cavazos will be remembered as the man who built an empire and then handed someone the tools to burn it down. Harry Taco Bowman, Outlaws, MC, USA. When Harry Bowman decided a man should die, he did not just have him killed. He had the newspaper clippings of the murder mailed to Outlaws MC chapters across the country, like trophies. That was the signature of the man the FBI eventually placed among its 10 most wanted fugitives, and it tells you most of what you need to know about how he ran the club. The clippings in question belonged to Raymond "Bear" Chaffin. Chaffin had left the Outlaws MC for the Warlocks and sided with the Hells Angels. And to Bowman, that was betrayal. So in 1991, he gave the order to kill him. He picked a member named Alex Ankerick to do it, and the plan was patient. Win Chaffin's trust, then take him when the moment came. Ankerick followed it exactly. He got close enough to stay at Chaffin's own house, and when the chance arrived, he put 4 quiet shots into the back of Chaffin's head. For the killing, Ankerick was patched into the club, and the clippings went out in the mail. But Bowman did not save his violence for rivals, because he turned it on his own men just as fast. During Daytona Bike Week in 1992, a former Outlaws MC probate named Jønke Nielsen made the mistake of fighting with an Atlanta officer of the club. So the next morning, Bowman had him dragged into a motel room, and after the beating, he gave the order to get rid of him. Nielsen was thrown off a 3-story balcony. He lived, but the broken bones stayed with him for life. And when a member named Kevin Talley was pressured into signing a statement admitting the Outlaws MC was a criminal enterprise, Bowman had him lured to Detroit, locked in the clubhouse, and worked over for days until Talley quit the club, rather than wait for the beating he knew was coming. What made Bowman's era dangerous, though, was not the individual bodies. It was that he turned the Outlaws MC into a war machine, and under him the kidnappings and killings and bombings spread across state lines until the club was less a motorcycle gang than an armed organization at war. In 1999, agents raided a quiet Michigan home and finally took him off the 10 most wanted list. But by then, the thing he had built had already outgrown him. Leif Ivar Christiansen, Hells Angels, Norway. By 2012, the Norwegian police intelligence unit Kripos had finished counting, and the number they landed on was one that no government uses lightly. 120 Hells Angels members in Norway, 400 criminal convictions between them, roughly 1,000 separate breaches of the Norwegian Penal Code, running through violence, rape, serious drug crime, and threats. On the strength of that count, Kripos did something a state reserves for the worst of what it faces. It declared the Hells Angels a criminal organization, not a club with criminal members in it, but a criminal organization outright. And the man who had led the Norwegian chapter across that line was Leif Ivar Christiansen. What makes Christiansen worth understanding is not the drugs or the weapons, though those were there. It is what his chapter had started taxing by the end. Under him, the Norwegian Hells Angels moved into the country's piercing and tattoo industry, and they ran it like a business with rules about who was allowed to earn. If a person wanted to open a studio, they first had to understand who owned that space, so competitors who did not fall into line did not last. Some were robbed, some were threatened. It sounds almost small next to the cocaine tonnage elsewhere on this list, but it is the opposite of small, because an organization only starts squeezing tattoo shops once it has already saturated the drug trade and the vice trade and the smuggling routes. It had run out of easy ground, and it had run out because it already owned all of it. The courts caught what they could. In 2011, a Norwegian court convicted Christiansen of aggravated robbery, several drug offenses, and threatening competitors in that same tattoo trade, and sentenced him to 57 months and a heavy fine. But the conviction was the smaller half of the story, because he went to prison and the organization he had built kept running without him. By then, it was no longer about any one man. It was about the machine he had helped make, a machine that had already been declared, by the Norwegian state itself, to be something a country has to defend against. A machine that outlives the man who built it is one measure of danger. Turning the club into a war machine and landing your own face on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted is another, and that is where the next name comes in. Marius Lazar, Hell's Angels. Romania, United States Marshals do not usually collect suspects from the departure lounges of Eastern Europe, but on the morning of January 16, 2023, a team of them stood at a boarding gate in Bucharest waiting for a Romanian biker because Marius Lazar had built something that reached all the way across the Atlantic, and the reach ran in both directions. Romania had never been Hell's Angels country. The club's European empire had been built from the west, out of Amsterdam and Hamburg and Copenhagen and London, and the east was an afterthought for most of the expansion years. Lazar changed that. He founded Romania's first Hell's Angels chapter, and he did not build small, because he wired it straight into something far larger than local crime. He built a transatlantic cocaine pipeline, moving product from the United States into Europe, with couriers flying into Bucharest to arrange the transport and the money washed clean through Romanian real estate before it moved again. It was structured, it was international, and it was deliberate. A Romanian chapter president sitting at the junction of American supply and European demand. For a while, the distance protected him. When Romanian and American investigators finally moved together, raids across Bucharest and Ilfov County turned up luxury cars, motorcycles, $200,000 in cash, weapons, and cocaine. But an arrest in Romania and a courtroom in the United States were separated by an extradition process that grinds slowly. So Lazar stayed in the country he had built his life in, and for a time it looked as though the gap between Bucharest and an American court might be wide enough to keep him out of reach. It was not. Romania approved the request. The marshals flew in, and Lazar was walked onto a plane bound for Texas. On November 17, 2023, a federal jury in Beaumont convicted him on 3 counts: racketeering conspiracy, conspiracy to import cocaine, and conspiracy to launder money. The sentence was 300 months, 25 years in an American prison for the man who planted the Hell's Angels flag in Romania and ran a cocaine network across an ocean, undone in the end because an ocean is not as wide as it used to be. That belief that an ocean or a border is protection is what breaks the men on this list one after another, and the next one built his whole operation on the idea that no market was ever too small to own. Kevin de Cruz, Hell's Angels, France. It was September 18th, 2021, and the American Saloon Festival in Tarbes was in full swing. Classic cars and country music and thousands of families in the southwest sun. If a stranger had wandered through it that afternoon, they'd have seen a celebration and nothing more, and they'd never have guessed a man was about to be killed in the middle of it. But moving through that same crowd were members of 2 rival clubs, because the Hell's Angels had come to send a message. A club called the Rebels had pushed into the southwest, so the Angels wanted it made clear who controlled that ground. Around 3:30, the 2 groups crossed in the parking lot, and the crossing turned into a brawl. 10 or so Hell's Angels closed around the Rebels, and the knives came out, and in the churn of it, one man moved differently from all the rest. His name was Kevin de Cruz. He was 31, and before the patch, he'd been a commando parachutist in the French army who had served in Afghanistan. On the footage, a 52-year-old Rebels member named Joseph Pontruet stands with his back turned. So Da Cruz comes in from behind, and he stabs him 5 times in the back and the thigh before Pontruet can even turn to face him. The whole thing takes about 30 seconds. Pontruet died from the wounds, and 3 other rebels went down seriously hurt around him. The arrests came within weeks, and by June 2025, Da Cruz was standing trial in Bordeaux for murder and 3 attempted murders. His defense called it self-defense, but the prosecutor called it what the video showed: A man killed in 30 seconds over a war for territory, for a red and white emblem, for nothing in the end. And in those 30 seconds, he said, Kevin da Cruz was the angel of death. The jury believed the prosecutor, so the verdict came back as premeditated assassination. 25 years, with 2/3 to serve before any chance of parole. He took it with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed past everyone, the same flat control he'd carried into the parking lot. A soldier's training had been turned on a man whose only crime was wearing the wrong colors on ground the angels had claimed, and that logic, colors on the wrong territory answered with a blade, is the engine that drives this entire list. From here, the killing stops belonging to one afternoon and starts belonging to whole countries. Ali Ipekci, Hell's Angels, Belgium. May 20th, 2011. Maasmechelen, an industrial zone in the Belgian province of Limburg. The Outlaws were holding an opening reception for a new tire center, and there was no reason to expect anything but a business afternoon. Members and hangarounds and supporters had gathered to mark the occasion. Ali Ipekci walked in. He was a Hell's Angel, and he raised a gun and shot 3 men dead where they stood. Freddie Putt, an Outlaws member. Jeff Bankin, a hangaround. Michael Garrikins, a supporter. Then he turned and left. 3 people killed at a tire center opening in the middle of the afternoon. And this was not a war with rockets and car bombs escalating on both sides. It was a Tuesday. It was one man who walked into a rival club's celebration and executed 3 of them before anyone understood what was happening. The case against him was not complicated, because the facts were not complicated. He had been there. 3 people were dead. On February 6th, 2015, a Belgian court convicted him of triple murder and sentenced him to 30 years. What puts Ipekci at the bottom of this list is not that he was less lethal than the men above him. 3 dead in under a minute is as final as anything in this countdown. It is that he did it alone, for one afternoon, without the machinery of a war or an empire behind him. The men who climbed from here did the same kind of damage, and then kept doing it at a scale that pulled in whole countries. 25 men, 5 clubs, and a trail of bodies across 4 decades. Some started wars, and the deadliest of them tried to break a nation's justice system itself. Most are in prison now, but the clubs they built are still out there, still fighting over the same ground. And of all the enemies the Hell's Angels ever faced, only one was small enough to crush in an afternoon, yet stubborn enough to fight them to a standstill for 8 years. Click the next video to see the club that dared to take on the Hell's Angels and refused to die.